This is, as we all know, just a gigantic cause of human rights and really a growing challenge to all of us. I learned a small amount about it years ago in the 1970s when I was a prosecutor, and I may have shared this a little bit last year, but I started the first rape counseling victim witness assistance program in Massachusetts, one of the first in the country back in the 70s. It was early. And our model was Henry Morgenthau, not Henry, the district attorney in New York.
Yeah.
Robert Morgenthau, who was sort of the model for district attorneys and was there for years and years and years. And it was really fascinating to sort of learn how, this underworld was working. And I remember even trying a prostitute who allegedly had been raped, and everybody said, "You're crazy, you can't take that case on, you'll never prove a prostitute could be raped." And we did, actually. We won the case and sort of proved that rights can extend into very improbable places. So I think for a lot of people, they don't get it. They just don't understand what this is all about. And it's a tragedy that they don't, but I think increasingly they are because we're engaged. I think this all-government effort is something that we can be enormously proud of. I know the president, obviously, who has created this, is extremely focused on it and very dedicated to the notion that we all can make a difference. And it's very rare. I think, a lot of you have sat around this table or others in the administration longer than I have, but it's very rare to have an all-government effort where people are coordinating as much as we are and really putting their energies into this. So we're going to continue to go after this. It's a national security issue as well as a moral imperative. And I think everybody here is tuned into that. But everybody has to be part of it. Healthcare providers, diplomats, law enforcement, immigration, you name it, we're all at the table. It's the only way to fight it. So it takes all kinds of shapes, obviously. You have Cambodian men who are lured under false pretenses to go somewhere, and suddenly they're in forced labor at sea and working underage and in horrible conditions as slaves on a ship, on a fishing vessel or something. You have Nepalese women who are abducted or coerced or lured into a sex industry that sends them off to destinations in the Gulf where they are literally made slaves. You have Haitian children taken from their families who are deprived of education, forced into labor in a home that is not their own. And I remember when I went to the Vatican just the other day with the President, and we met with the Pope, that in the course of some discussion there with His Eminence the Secretary of State, Cardinal Parolin, who brought up this as a major interest, obviously, of the Church. And as the Pope says, when any man, woman, or child is enslaved anywhere, it's a threat to peace, justice, and human dignity everywhere. So that's what sort of brings us here. These are not American values, these are universal values. And I'm delighted to have such a qualified and incredibly committed group of people around the table to work at it. The State Department, as I think many of you know, is working hand in hand with governments, the private sector, faith-based groups, in order to end this scourge and to identify the people who are enslaved and free them, and to hold those accountable who place them in that jeopardy. So I'm pleased to announce today that the State Department is planning to work with the Conference of Catholic Bishops in order to map and coordinate the Church's efforts on a global basis to be able to combat this crime. So I think that was a good thing that came out of that meeting. This partnership, we hope, is going to make it a lot easier for people to be able to share information, share best practices, identify caregivers and advocates, and it will ramp up our capacity around the world to be able to identify victims and get them the help that they need. So you have to put this in a perspective. I was struck by the fact, and I talked to Lou about it a little earlier today when we were going over this. When I was here last year and we did this, I remember the figure because it struck out at me, 6 million people, and we were saying, wow, that's a lot of people. But in fact, the pedagogy has expanded since we made that announcement. And that was based on some government's reporting, et cetera. But now, through our efforts and the efforts of other people, there's a much more scientific and much more competent basis by which we are measuring the levels of this on a global basis, the result of which is we have a range of somewhere between 21 million and 29 million people who are enslaved. And that comes from a far more rigid, scientifically based analysis reaching in proactively, not waiting for people to report to you, but we proactively going out and trying to find out what's the situation. That's just stunning. I mean, absolutely staggering. And so it's a real measure of the amount of work that we have ahead of us and what we need to do. Let me just tell you, I have instructed our Trafficking in Persons office to zero in and really focus on the issues that are involved here. We're working with NGOs to make sure that the global fishing industry doesn't get any of its supplies from forced labor, including forced child labor. And thanks to the President's executive order on procurement, a lot of you around this table are all working and shining a spotlight on our own purchasing and contracting practices. In the end, this is a moral fight, and we're going to have to hold people accountable in places where they really don't like to be held accountable, and we all know that. But history teaches us that when the United States of America stands up on this kind of an issue, it makes the world of difference. It defines us, and it is critical for us to be able to have this kind of impact on the destiny of people on this planet. And I think we can be hugely proud when we all leave here, when this administration has finished its work. This is going to be a very important legacy for the President, for the country. So I want to turn things over to Ambassador Sita Bhakta, give us a quick update on the work the task force has been doing, and then we'll come back and we have a chance to honor some folks, and then we go around and get everybody's input. Lou?